Okay, so welcome everyone to this tutorial. The objective of this tutorial is to help those who are moving from MATLAB to Java. So we studied MATLAB in the previous course, and now they are doing programming too, which will be in Java programming. I have my friend with me, ChatGPT, who will help me with this presentation. Do you want to make any comments, ChatGPT?
Sure, I'm happy to help. Transitioning from MATLAB to Java can seem challenging at first, but we'll focus on the key differences and similarities to make it easier. Let's get started.
Thank you. So I'll ask you when I need some help, but now I'll go ahead with what we're going to do. We will be looking at the syntax. The syntax is the way you type your code and the structure of that code, and we'll cover that one. We'll look at the data type, we'll look at the variables and operators, how they are used in Java and how they use in MATLAB, and how you move from MATLAB to Java. We'll look at control structures, looping, using for loop, while loop. We'll look at the if and else statement and switch, how they are done in Java, to just get you an idea. Then we look at the functions. In MATLAB, they use functions. In Java, we use methods. We call it methods, and they are very similar. And how you create a function or a method in Java, that's something we look at it. We look at the arrays and array list. These are critical tools in Java. In MATLAB, metrics are the other thing. Then we look at an object-oriented programming. The rest of the course will be focused on the object-oriented, but now we'll just do the basics of object-oriented in Java. So, Mr. ChatGPT, did we miss anything here?
Your outline seems quite comprehensive. You might also want to briefly discuss the differences in error handling and debugging between MATLAB and Java, as it can be quite relevant for students transitioning between the two.
Sure.
Is there anything specific you'd like to add or focus on?
No, I think this looks fine now. We will be spending a good time on error handling in the course, and students will get more depth how to deal with error handling later. Now this is an introduction to the two languages, so we need to be more maybe focused. Okay, this slide now gives you the key differences, and we'll get into more details later. So if you look at the feature like execution of your code, when you run your code, how it's run. MATLAB, they use interpreted method, or Java, they use compiled virtual machine, Java virtual. Basically, they take the code and create something in between the binary and the text they call bytecode. And then there is a machine or a software called Java virtual machine will run your code. But that's how Java it works, and we will spend some time to see that later in the course. In terms of variables, MATLAB is very flexible, so there's no explicit type needed. You don't have to say this is a number, integer, or a string, or double, or those restrictions on the data types that you can use. There is nothing in MATLAB, but Java is very strong in that one. It requires you to declare what is this variable. Is it numbers, or integer, or double, or float, or long, or object, or whatever. So the data type in Java is very strong, and you need to make sure you do that. The index, if you have an array, in MATLAB it starts by 1, means the first element is at index 1. But in Java, the first element is at index 0. And that's something you need to keep in mind when you do looping or you go through your array or variables. Now, in the arrays, in terms of MATLAB, there is built-in support for matrix operation. It's a more scientific language. That's why it uses matrix and matrix operation. Java, they use array and array list. And there's so many other type of data in terms of classes and object you can create later. And that we'll talk about it when we talk about object-oriented programming. The functions, as I said before, In MATLAB, we call them function, and they defined by using the keyword function. You say function before. But in Java, no, there's not function. They called method. That's the first thing. I need to start by something called access provider. Is it public, private, protected? And then you decide if you are in the main class, all your methods in the main class should have static in it, so public static, and we will look at this in details when we're coming now in the next examples. And then object oriented, I don't want to spend time on object oriented because the whole course will be on object oriented, so we'll cover it in more detail. Object oriented is supported in MATLAB, but it's a limited support, but Java is very strong on object oriented. It's created with object oriented in mind when it was created. Mr. ChatGPT, any comments you would like to make?
Your explanation is detailed and clear. Highlighting these key differences will definitely help students transition smoothly. Emphasizing practical examples and hands-on practice might further reinforce their understanding. Great job.
Okay, let's move to the next one. Now here's an example. If you want to do hello world in MATLAB, it's a very simple. You just say display, open bracket, hello world, and that's it. And in Java, no, you need to have first a class. So in this case, we have a class called hello world. So public class hello world. We have this phrase, very important. We're starting the class. This is ending the class. And inside there is a special method called public static void main, and it takes one parameter of array called args. It can be x, arg, anything. You put anything here, it doesn't make difference as long as it is string open bracket, close bracket. And then opening that method or function and closing it, and inside this is the equivalent to display, which you have to write it exactly the same, system.out.println. Later you will know that we will have something called package. In package there are classes, and in class there are methods and variables. This is just, you need to remember it now as it is, system.out.println if you want to print anything, and then open bracket, and inside you write the message you want to display on the screen, semicolon at the end. You notice semicolon is needed for this statement, but is not needed for the method line. Anything else, Mr. ChatGPT, we can talk here about creating hello world and the difference between MATLAB and Java?
That's a great explanation. You can also mention that Java is case sensitive, so the class name and method names must match exactly in terms of capitalization. This can be a common pitfall for beginners. It's also worth noting the importance of the main method as the entry point in Java programs, unlike MATLAB, which doesn't require such a structure.
Oh, this is very good. Thank you, Mr. ChatGPT. Really, this is important. Java is a case sensitive, so uppercase, lowercase are critical. So main, for example, with M lowercase, if you put M uppercase, it will not work. And it's important to know, as our friend said, the main method is the entry into your code. It's the first thing will start when you run your code. This is good points. Now, in terms of variables and data type, the Java, as you said, is very strong on data type. Now, you used to say in MATLAB x equal 5. This would not work in Java. You need to decide, is it integer or double or float? So you have this data type at the beginning to be there. The same thing for y. This y is by default here. You put a decimal point, it becomes float in MATLAB. No, in Java you have to decide, do you want it to be double, do you want it to be integer? So you have to come with that. The same thing for string. So Java is very strong on deciding the data type to ensure it allocate the right memory to your data and make sure your variables are mixed up, not mixed up in your operation. And the two main differences, as we said, in Java it is explicit data type. You have to decide if it was data type, and you need to use semicolon at the end of each statement as well, and that's something important. Anything else we can say here, Mr. ChatGPT, that I missed?
Your explanation is quite comprehensive. You might also emphasize the importance of using proper naming conventions for variables and the concept of variable scope in Java. This will help students write cleaner and more organized code. Otherwise, you've covered the essentials very well.
Very good. This point by Mr. ChatGPT is very important. First one is naming convention. When you name any variable in any programming language, there are certain protocols being agreed among programmers. And in Java, for example, when you name a class, the first letter of the name of the class should be uppercase. And variables can be lowercase, but you need to find a meaningful variable. For example, if you're dealing with student ID, call it student ID. So people, when they see it, they know this is student ID. When you name a method, the first letter of the method should be lowercase. First word of the method name should be lowercase. And then if you have other word in the same name of the method, for example, say register student. When I come to register student in Java, I need to put R small, student S capital. These things will come to it later. For now, what the more important two things I need you to know is that Java is very strong on the data type. Later we'll come to the scope. If you declare a variable, where can you access that variable? And that's something we will look at it later when we come to that. Now I just want to give you the high level differences, the critical one, and then the others we will look at it in more details. Now let's go to the operators. Operators, adding, dividing, multiplying, and things like that. As you can see, the plus, minus, multiply are available in both languages. But when you come to the raising to exponential to the power, MATLAB has this sign, but in Java it's not there. You need to use something called math.power, which a class called math in the library. We need to import it, and later we'll talk about that. And then there is a special method called power, which you put the number and to what you are raising that power to. So this is something there. The second one in MATLAB, you can 0 and 1 for Boolean, for something that true or false. In Java, you have to declare it as a Boolean. This is a special data type that you have in Java. Anything about operator you would like to add, my friend Mr. ChatGPT?
Your explanation is thorough. It's also helpful to mention that Java has additional operators like the modulo operator, percent for finding remainders, and the increment, plus plus, and decrement, minus minus operators. Understanding these will give students a broader toolkit for different operations. Great job covering the key differences.
Excellent, thank you for that. I think you are adding very important points that I missed, and we will cover them through the course. Now, let's go into the condition statement, and we'll focus on if else. They're very similar, as you can see, between the two, but there are differences. You can, in MATLAB, for example, you'll have something called end, to end your statement. It's not in Java. Java, instead of end and beginning, they use the braces, this one, this brace and this brace. And then your condition should be between two brackets like that. So here your condition are just on their own. But here they are in two brackets, and there's one brace here to say this is the beginning of the if statement. And then in the if statement, if it's true, this what will happen. If else, then this is the other block that will happen, which student.print out whatever. System.print print out out.println x is 5 or. Now the important thing, there are two blocks here. One block with one brace start here and end here. Another block with brace start from here and end here. And if the first is true, it will run the first block, whatever the code in that one. If it's not, it will go to the else and run the second block to do. So there is no end in this case, like which in MATLAB. Anything else, Mr. ChatGPT, you want to add to this example?
You've covered the key differences well. It's also worth mentioning that in Java, the conditions inside the if statement need to be explicitly enclosed in parentheses, and each block of code is defined by curly braces, RS. This structure helps in organizing code clearly and avoids ambiguity. You might also note that Java's if-else statements can be nested for more complex conditions, similar to MATLAB. Overall, you've done a great job explaining these concepts. Let me know if you have any other questions or need further clarification on any topic. Good luck with your tutorial.
Thank you. Okay, so the next one we'll look at the loops now. In MATLAB, we'll look at the for loop. For loop is very simple in MATLAB, and you just say for I equal, and then you start point, ending point between, you use the colon to do that. And then you have an end at the end to end your block. So this block will be repeated that way. In Java, there is a different structure. You need to decide the initial value for your loop. Similarly here, this is 1. This is int I equal 1. Means we declaring a variable called I starting by 1. So the first value for I is 1. And then you have semicolon and other area, which what I call it usually while, or the condition for the loop to continue. So this loop will continue while I is less than or equal 5. As soon as it goes above 5, it will stop the loop. So the loop will continue while I is less than or equal 5. Now here including 5 because we used equal, less than or equal. The last block in this is semicolon and then the increment. Here I will be incremented by 1. When you use I plus plus, means I every time will be incremented by 1. If it is 0, it become 1, it's 1 become 2, and so on to do. And then you have a brace here, curly brace to start it, and curly brace to end that for loop. And inside you put your block of code, can be 1 line, 2 line, whatever number of line, and there you can display. So here we're displaying the value of I. So I at the beginning is 1, so the result will come 1, will come 2, will come 3, until it become 5. If I want to start by 0, I could start it 1 equal 0. Here are just a few explanations. So MATLAB of the differences. Of course, MATLAB loops start from 1. Java starts from 0. It can start from 0 or even negative number or any number. So you can start from anywhere you want the loop to start. And but usually the loop is used for counting things. So 0, 1 is the default thing. And Java use explicit initialization. You have to initialize your variable here. You need to say int I equal 1. Or you initialize I somewhere before the code. That still will work, but it has to be initialized somewhere. And that's important thing. Mr. ChatGPT, anything you would like to add to this explanation of the for loop?
Your explanation is excellent. You might also highlight that in Java, there's more flexibility with the for loop structure, such as using different increment values or conditions. For example, you can decrement or use complex conditions within the loop. Additionally, you could mention that there's a for each loop in Java, which is useful for iterating over arrays or collections. Overall, you've provided a great foundation for understanding loops in both languages.
Very good. The incremental doesn't have to be only 1. It can be 2, 3, 4. If I want to jump from 1 to 3 and then to 5, I can make I equal I plus 2. Or inside here, I increment I again inside the loop. So I can increment or decrement the way you like, as our friend said. And you can build also a nested for loop and as well. Okay, next one is we're going to the functions or the methods. If you want to declare a function in MATLAB, you just use the keyword function, then you give it you say this is the output is result equal. This means this function will return a value and will store it in a variable called result. And you come with the name for the function, add a and b. So this function basically takes two numbers a and b, add them together, and return the result. And that's the end of the function. Okay, this is the way it's structured. So in Java, if you want to do a similar thing, you need to use public static. If you are in the main class, but later we will build something outside the main class, you don't need to use static. But in the main class, you need to use static. And then what data type it will return. So it's going to return integer. See here, we didn't decide what data type. We have only the variable called result. But here we need to know the data type that it will give us after it runs its operation, after it can do that. And what the name of the method? You come with the name, add here. And now there's a and b. We need to declare each one. What data type is a? A is integer, b is integer in this example. So this is important way to do it. And then you have the curly brace bracket here, opening and closing. Inside, you do the calculation. So for example, here we're returning the value of a plus b. So we add a plus b, and we use the word return. There is word return in Java. There is no word return in MATLAB. MATLAB will, because you declare result here, it expects your return result. But here you have to say in Java, return a plus p. And that's how the functions or methods in Java works. Mr. ChatGPT, anything I missed?
Your explanation is quite thorough. Another point you might mention is that in Java, methods can return different data types, including objects and even void, no return value. This flexibility is important in object-oriented programming. Also, Java methods can have multiple parameters and can be overloaded, meaning you can have multiple methods with the same name but different parameter lists. Overall, your explanation provides a solid foundation. Great job!
Thank you. I think what we added are important, but they will come later in the course. But one important thing, if this function is not returning anything, then we don't use the word return inside, and we also, instead of int, we use void. Void means there's no data type. And as our friend ChatGPT said, it can return anything. It can be double, can be an object like student, for example, or a car or anything. You can put it here, and then you can return it when you do your operations. We will talk more about this later in the course. Now, the last thing before our summary is the array and array list. In MATLAB, you use matrix mostly, and this is how you declare an array or a matrix. You just this is one-dimensional one. You use square bracket, and then you put your elements inside, the values of your element inside, and you can display any element you want. You want to display second element, you say A2, it will show the second element, and this is the second element. In Java, if you want to do that, you need to declare the data first. This is integer, and you put square brackets open close to indicate this is an array. And then you come with a variable for that array called a, and instead of square bracket which you use here, we use curly brace bracket, this one, and inside you put your elements, you close that bracket, and you put a semicolon at the end. Now if I want to display the second element, which 2 here when I want to display a second element, I use 2. Here if I want to display a second element, I use 1. Why? Because in Java, array index start by 0. So the value 1 is at index 0, value 2 is at index 1, and so on. So if I want to display the second element, I put 1. If I want the first element, I put 0. If I want to put the last element, I need to know how many elements I have, minus 1. Okay? And this way. So if I want the 5, I'll put here 4 to do that. So array in Java start by index 0. There's a difference between the value and the index. Here the value is 1, but it is at index 0. The value is 2 here at index 1. And the value 3 at index 2. And this is how it works in Java. Now if I go into something more advanced called array list in Java, the challenge with array, and we will look at it with examples in the course later, is once you declare an array and you give it a size, and if you want to grow it by adding another element, you cannot just do it that way. You need to create a new array, you copy it with a bigger list, and then you copy the data to it. It's complicated. The array list is a more dynamic. You can start with an empty array list, and then you start adding values to it. For example, here, this is an example. Array list is not in the default Java, so we need to do something called import. So we'll import another library from Java, which called Java utility array list. So import that one. Once you import it, we can create an array list. And the way to declare it, you need to say array list, and then this less than and greater than. In between, you decide the object that you want to create an array list of. In this case, we're creating integer values. So you put integer here. And then the name of the list, call list, and then we use the keyword called new. And we'll get into this in more details in the course when we start object-oriented. New basically create an object from your array list. And this is the array list. Now this array list is empty. There's nothing in it. To add values to it, use the name of the list and then a method called add. So array list, add 1, add 2, add 3, and now this will be populated by the 3 elements. And if you want to display any element, this is the way you display it. 1 will display the second element because again it starts by 0, and so on. So these are the array and array list. We will have more time on array and array list. Now just want to give you an idea because you already use matrix in MATLAB, and you need to know how you declare an array in Java and how you deal with it. And that's the explanation. Mr. ChatGPT, anything that you can add to simplify this explanation to our student?
Your explanation is clear and informative. One point that might simplify things for students is to highlight the differences in how arrays and array lists handle size. Arrays in Java have a fixed size, whereas array lists are dynamic and can grow as needed. This makes array lists more flexible for situations where the number of elements isn't known in advance. Overall, you've provided a great foundation for understanding these concepts.
Thank you. Now let's move to the last slide we have. This is a summary of MATLAB to Java transition. So in variable, for example, in MATLAB, we can just say x equal 10. We don't need to decide what is the x, is it number or whatever it is, what data type. In Java, we must specify the type. So we need to say int, double, float, whatever. So we need to decide the data type. Printing to display things in MATLAB, you just use disp and then open bracket and quotation in between. You put your text and semicolon at the end. In Java, you need to use system with S uppercase dot out dot print ln. Ln means a new line, by the way. Print it in a new line, and then open bracket, quotation, then the text you want to display, and you close by semicolon. If you don't want a new line, you remove a line, just use print. Print will print it on the same previous line. Now the next thing is for loop. For loop in MATLAB, you say for I equal, and then starting point, ending point, between you have colon. Here now you need to decide the type of counter you're using. Our counter here is I, that we're using to count how many times you loop. So int I equal 1, you have to declare it, and then your semicolon while I less than or equal 5. This is the condition for the loop to continue, and then semicolon, and then how much you increasing I with. So I is increased or incremented by 1 here. You can make it incremented by 2, 3, 4, 5. You just put a formula there, and it will increment it by that. Functions. In MATLAB, you start by the word function, and then what data type it will return, if it's going to return, sorry, what variable it will return, it's going to return. For example, returning something called result, and then equal, and then the name of your function, and then between bracket are your two variables or parameters you are sending to the function. Here you need to say public static if you are in the main class. In the other classes you can have private, protected. We'll talk about all this later. And then you need to decide what type of data it returns. Here you decide the name of the variable, but here the data you want to return, and can return any data type that you would like to return, including some objects or classes that we will create in future. And then the name of that method, and in between these are the two variables, but each variable should be declared as what data type it belongs to. So the A is belong to integer and B belongs to integer, but can be A integer and B double, for example, or can be any data type you can have. And you have unlimited, you can have many variables. Then array indexing means where the index start from, which point. In MATLAB start by 1, in Java start by 0. That means in Java the first element is at index 0, regardless of the value that element has. And then next thing is object creation, which we will do more in this course. But in MATLAB you simply just use your class, and then you pass to it the details. So this is the object P now created this way. In Java now you need to start by the data type first. This is a class called person, and then P and equal new, and this is again person. There's something called constructor, we'll come to it later. You don't need to know it now, but that's the constructor, which constructor are always the same name as the class. So these two should be the same. And then you pass your data to it. So in summary, this is the difference between MATLAB and Java, and how you can transition in terms of your syntax, coding, of variables, of for loops, conditions, functions, from MATLAB to Java. Mr. ChatGPT, anything you would like to add?
This summary covers all the key points effectively. One additional note you could mention is the importance of practicing these concepts through examples to get comfortable with Java structure. Transitioning from MATLAB to Java can be challenging at first, but consistent practice will help solidify these concepts. Great job on putting together a comprehensive summary.
Thank you. Do you have any other advice for students who are moving into object-oriented programming?
Certainly. For students transitioning to object-oriented programming, it's important to start thinking in terms of objects and classes rather than just functions and procedures. Focus on understanding how to model real-world entities as classes and how these classes interact through objects. Practice encapsulation, inheritance, and polymorphism concepts. The key is to get comfortable with thinking about code structure and design, not just implementation. Practice and experimentation are crucial to mastering these principles.
Thank you. This was very useful, and thank you for your support. So my student, now you understand how you move from MATLAB to Java. With practice, we'll do more practice. You will find you converting or moving into Java in a smooth way, and you will enjoy it. But you need to practice. The practice is the key in this case. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you had a good time watching this video.